Hello, cowgirls and cowboys. I'm Andrew Parks, and I've been the owner of Parks Horseshoeing for 11 and a half years now. I actually started at the age of 18 before I graduated high school. Instead of going on senior trips, I would leave school early and drive up to Elk Grove, California to Pacific Coast Horseshoeing School and learn how to shoe horses. As soon as I graduated, I decided to move up to Elk Grove full time and stay on the premises while learning to shoe horses. After I graduated there, I apprenticed for a couple farriers for about 6 months, and I found that I wasn't making enough money to even afford gas. And while I learned a lot from them, I had to go out on my own. And since I went out on my own, I still had to further my education, and I would attend horseshoeing clinics. And I found that horseshoeing clinics were a great place to pick up new horses as a new farrier. A lot of the older guys would get extra horses that they didn't have time for and would give them to the newer guys, which was very helpful. And the second half of the clinics were usually who could make the best homemade horseshoes. And I'm cool with that, but I wanted to learn more about horse hooves, hoof health, and shoeing techniques. And a lot of the clients I had at the time, they had gathered horseshoeing books over the years as being horse owners to educate themselves. And they would hand them to me, and I would actually learn a lot from these books. And I still wanted to learn even more. So I went to the internet. At YouTube at the time, it was still new. There weren't a lot of horseshoeing videos on the internet. And so I would have to go and read articles, horseshoe journals, and also take what I learned on the internet and try it on my own horses, like glue on shoes, for example. And after 11 and a half years and all this education, I finally feel comfortable enough to share with you guys 10 hoof related issues that I'm commonly asked about. And instead of having to repeat myself all the time, I'd rather just make a video, and when someone asks me, I could give them a link. And so let's get started with the meat of this video. And I hope you guys learned some new stuff. And if you have any questions at the end, please leave a comment down below. Thank you. Number one, what to look for in hoofs when buying a new horse. When purchasing a new horse, most people often overlook the hooves, unless they buy a horse from out of state and are required to get a vet check for soundness and other health issues. And I urge everyone buying a new horse to hire a vet or a farrier to come out and check out the hoofs before you purchase the horse. Yes, this horse isn't yours yet. Why do you want to spend extra money to have it checked out? Well, this could potentially save you a lot of money down the road and a lot of heartache and headache. And often when people have called me out, I only charge them 20 bucks. That's just for my gas, not even for time. And what I often find is horses that have navicular issues, laminitis issues, founder issues, uh, severe bruising, and a lot of these issues can be avoided just by paying $20 to have a farrier come and take a look. And so it's very important that you guys know what you're getting into. And there are horse traders still in this world, and they like to take advantage of people and make extra money. And if you still choose to purchase a horse without a farrier or a vet being involved, I urge you to at least look at the hoofs. And if you see rings going around all the hoofs, you'll see pictures later in this video presentation. Stay away from those horses. Also, horses that tend to sit back on their heels and not so much on their toes, because that's called camping, and they're usually having some type of issue, usually laminitis, founder, other stuff. And if a horse looks tender-footed, walk it on the gravel, walk it on the road for a minute. And if it's looking ouchy, then that might not be a horse you want to buy unless you're willing to invest in horseshoes, which are very expensive every other month. All right, I wish you guys luck, and let's get on to number two. Number two, hoof cracks and Mustang rolls. Hoof cracks, chips, and splits are extremely common in horse hoofs. As a horse owner, you probably see these all the time. And most of the time, these are superficial, meaning they just look ugly. But there are some severe cracks that you should be aware of. Usually, some of them are coronary cracks. That's where the hair meets the hoof and are often caused by some traumatic event, usually another horse stepping on them at the coronary band, or them getting their hoof stuck in a fence, or even a very bad abscess. And these coronary band cracks, depending on where they're located, if they're more towards the back, like the heel end, they can split all the way down to the very bottom of the hoof and completely break off a whole heel. And those type of cracks, the heel never will grow back correctly. Sometimes not at all. Sometimes the heel will grow back, but they'll never be fully connected to the rest of the hoof. And you always have this permanent crack. A lot of horses get these coronary band cracks when they're very young horses and their mothers step on them at the coronary band area. And so they just kind of go their whole life like this. And what most horseshoers do is they just file down the extra hoof. And, most of the time they grow back still pretty strong and you don't have to shoe them. And other times they're very weak and you have to shoe them. And so that's basically between you, your farrier, and your vet to figure out if your horse needs a shoe for those particular types of cracks and splits. Another bad type of crack or split is when the sole of the hoof is involved. A lot of times we get the quarter cracks or the little splits on the toes, and if those splits go into the sole, that's pretty bad. I would say put a shoe on that bad boy and hope it heals up. Get some medicine on it, contact a vet and a farrier. Get some work on that sole crack. That's going to be your biggest issue because the sole is what's protecting the coffin bone, and we really want that bone protected, and probably put in a rubber pad, a plastic pad, any type of pad in there, and get it cushioned up and get those cracks correct. Now, another way to kind of go about not getting cracks, kind of a preventive measure, is the Mustang roll. Now, most Mustang rolls are pretty severe. Now, I don't know where these farriers are learning it from, but if you go out in the wild over here in California, you could go see some Mustangs, and they have all these hard, rocky land to run on, and they kind of chip and grind away their own hooves. No farriers are out there to deal with them, and I'm not really quite sure where this Mustang roll originated from. I've never done research on it, I'm not going to lie to you, but I do kind of use it in a half measure. So instead of a full Mustang roll that seem extremely excessive to me, I'll still roll the edges of the hoof when I'm filing, because it kind of smooths it out. It allows the horse to break over easier, and it just gives them, it seems, a more sturdy hoof, more of a solid hoof, instead of having edges at the bottom of the hoof that are easily chippable from rocks, kicking things like your fences and all that. Alright, so let's move on. Number 3, thrush and how to treat it. Thrush is another very common issue in horse hooves, and it's a bacterial infection in the frog area, in the sulcus and sole. It's a black, stinky, gross little grimy looking stuff, and it thrives in moist, damp, dirty, mucky, humid areas, usually from unclean stalls or paddocks, or just swampy pastures that are irrigated, and sometimes in the winter, the wet, mucky areas in your horse fields. And so, how do we treat this nasty, stinky stuff? Well, there's a few ways. You could start by cleaning your stalls, mucking out the paddock area, and really just keeping the horse's hoofs cleaned out. And it also starts on the horseshoer's level. He needs to trim back the frog, he needs to trim back the hoof bars, and he needs to kind of trim away all the dead sole holding in the bacteria, and he needs to get it at a stable level for you to keep up and keep cleaning it out. And there's lots of products at the feed stores that you could go and buy. You could buy them online, stuff like Thrush Buster, Copper Tox, all kinds of thrushy medicines. Or if you want, you could get an old water bottle at home, an empty one. You could put about 15% bleach in it and 85% water, shake it up, and then get a permanent marker and mark on the water bottle, X out the water, and mark bleach plus water. I don't want anybody to drink the stuff on accident, so please mark it up or throw it away as soon as you're done with it. But usually when your horse has thrush, you're going to be using it for a week or two to get rid of that thrush. So please mark on the water bottle that it has bleach. And once you have it, take it to your horse, clean out the horse hoof, hold up the hoof like a farrier holds it up, dump the water in there, and hold up the hoof for at least 5 to 10 seconds. Let it kind of soak in there. Sometimes the horse will feel it kind of burn their hoof. You know, if you get bleach on your hand, you'll kind of burn your hand a little bit. But really, they shouldn't with just a 15% diluted water mixture. Number 4, hoof abscesses and how to treat them. The most common type of abscesses found in horse hoofs are termed gravel abscesses, and this is because horses will pick up little pieces of rock or little wood splinters, and they'll get stuck in the hoof. And if you're not always cleaning out the horse hoofs, which none of us are, let's be honest, not 24/7 anyways, a little tiny pebble or a little splinter can work its way up into the hoof and infect the hoof. And this could be in the sole, it could be in the frog, it could be closer to the hoof wall, and it could even work its way from the bottom of the hoof all the way up to the hairline, the coronary band, and you could get those coronary band abscesses. You can also get abscesses from fungal germs like thrush. You can get it from hot nails, a shoer shoeing a little too close, too far into the sole, and causing a slight infection in the hoof, or even them cutting too much sole out of the hoof can cause a little infection and turn into an abscess. A horse might even have an internal infection, maybe in their stomach, in their gut, maybe an ulcer. And what a lot of people don't know is the stomach affects the hoofs in horses. And so what if the stomach is sick, you could see it in the hoofs as well, and that can often cause abscesses or just discoloring of the hoof sole. And also you can get internal thrush, which I did not speak about in the last section. Internal thrush is a more severe case of thrush and is extremely hard to diagnose, and it's also kind of rare. If you have a good vet, they could usually figure it out for you. And the last way to get abscess, well, I don't know about the last, but one of the last ways to get abscesses is bone fractures. And this is also something else that you would need to find out with the vet via x-ray. Most of the time, abscesses just pop on their own. And once they pop, the horse feels relieved and you could just go about your business. But most of the time, horse owners, they like to hasten the process because they see their horses limping around, not wanting to put pressure on their hoof. And one of the ways about going around this is cleaning out the hoof, having a farrier come trim it, try to maybe find the abscess area, narrow it down. They could even try to dig a little bit, but that's a little tricky. And also the vet may come out and try to dig and pop the abscess, and again, that's a little tricky because the abscess could maybe be 30 minutes from popping, or it could be a whole week away from popping. It might be that deep still in the hoof, and it's trying to surface its way out, kind of like a pimple. You can't pop it right when you get the little bud. It just hurts too much. You have to let it get a little bigger. Same with abscesses. And so one of the ways to draw out abscesses, make it go quicker, is to do Epsom salt baths. Now you get a bucket, fill up water with, throw some Epsom salt in there. Hopefully your horse allows you to put that injured hoof in the bucket of water. Most people use very shallow buckets, usually like grain dishes or something, and you just soak it in there 15 minutes a day or twice a day. Make it go faster. You could even soak in a old big sock, and then you could wrap that sock on the horse hoof, and that it has that wet Epsom salt, on the sock, and you're just kind of soaking the hoof in there. And lastly, once it's popped, once either the shoer, the vet pops it, or it pops on its own, you just kind of keep it cleaned out for a day to 3 days with the hoof pick, and that's when you could put betadine on it and just keep it from getting infected. Or you could just leave it alone. Most people just let it go about doing its own business, and it'll just pop, and that's the end of the story, and nobody treats it. It's sometimes not a big deal, and sometimes it is a big deal. Also, depending on where the abscess pops out of, if it's on the hoof wall, sometimes you might need a shoe. Also, while going through an abscess, it's best to pull a shoe. It'll relieve pressure, it'll let the abscess come out a little quicker. So that's my last little input on that. And let's move on to number 5, laminitis and food. Laminitis is the inflammation of the laminae, and we often see this when the hoof wall starts to spread away from the sole, starts to separate, and it weakens the sole, the integrity of the hoof, and the sole starts to drop, and that starts to rotate the coffin bone over time. If you catch this quick enough, then you might not get any rotation at all, and you can throw a shoe on or switch up the feed quick enough, and it'll start to self-correct. And as one farrier to another farrier, if you're watching my video, please let your client know that there may be a possible outbreak in the horse's hoof with laminitis or founder. You do your customer a disfavor by not telling them. You may be wrong. It might just be hoof wall separation from mud or some type of trauma. But if it is laminitis, then you could catch it quick enough before it becomes a big issue. A lot of times I'm left being the bad guy. People will have me come out and shoe their horses, and I'll say, wow, looks like this horse had laminitis all year. Well, my other shoer didn't say anything, and then they feel offended, when in fact I did not mean to offend them. When dealing with laminitis, it usually always goes back to the beginning, and that's what you're feeding them. What are they eating? Are they out on a irrigated pasture with 2-foot high grass that they're eating all day, every day for a whole year? Or are they eating grain like sweet cob? Are they eating lots of wheat hay? Whatever the fact, whatever they're eating, lots of carrots, lots of apples, it all goes back to sugars. Too much sugars. And this made me realize one day that some horses are more predisposed to laminitis and founder than other horses. Some horses will just never get it, and they could be on a irrigated field their whole life and never get it. And then you could have a horse out there for 2 months and can't walk for 2 months because they got it. And this made me correlate between horses and humans. Humans get diabetes from overeating sugars and all that, or they're just born with it. But I'm talking about the ones that develop it over time, like horses develop laminitis over time. And it's because something in our genetics allows us to be predisposed to these diseases, and we have to be aware of them, and we have to be able to treat them quick enough so they don't become something big and out of control. And so, what do we feed our horses with laminitis issues? A lot of vets say grass hay, and the customer goes, he's been eating pasture grass, and that's how he got it in the first place. Well, you need to kind of understand how hay is made. You go and cut it. You can't bale it the same day you cut it. You leave it for about a week. You let it go through a heat. If you go and cut it, bale it, stack it, put it in a barn, that night your barn's going to be on fire and you're going to lose your whole barn. And that's because you didn't allow the hay to be going through its heat. And when a horse is eating directly out of a pasture, that hay has all its sugars, nutrients, vitamins, and it's a little too strong for your horse. And some horses, like I said just a little minute ago, they could take it. They could eat it their whole life and nothing will go wrong. And other horses will just be hurting from eating it because their systems just can't handle it. And so that's why vets tell you to buy grass hay and feed them that, because it has less sugar, and after being cut and letting it go through its heat, it starts to lose some of its value, and it's not as sugary as something that your horse eats straight out of the pasture. Other vets say that alfalfa or grassy alfalfa is also alternative feed for horses with laminitis or founder. And this is a very debated issue. I've found over the years as a farrier, people giving their horses alfalfa, it makes them hot, that gives them more energy and all that, the horse itself, but the hoofs really aren't as affected as much as someone giving them sweet cob or letting them be out in a pasture that's irrigated and eating that all day long. So as a farrier, I'd say both sides are correct from my point of view. Now, 100% I urge everyone, every horse owner, to stay away from sweet cob. That's not good for horses. Do not give that to your horse. That'll give your horse laminitis, it'll give your horse founder. Stay away from that. You don't need it. There's alternative types of grains. Go get senior grain with low in sugar. Give beet pulp and rice bran mix. Make it kind of soupy in their dish. They love that. That's a great alternative. Don't get the sweet beet pulp. Don't get anything that says sweet on it. Keep horses with laminitis away from carrots, apples, anything sweet, guys. Alright? Grass hay, alfalfa, grassy alfalfa. You can even do a grassy oat hay. We call that volunteer hay. That's the natural stuff that comes up. Nobody plants it. If a vet's listening, they're probably cringing because I said volunteer oats, the oat word. Really, it doesn't have that much oats in it. It's mostly a pasture grass hay, wild grass. Now the grain hays. Oat, wheat, forage mix. What do you do with it? Do you feed it to your horses? Yes, you can feed it to your horses. Vet's probably, again, cringing in their seat. But like I said earlier, and they know too, as a vet and as a shoer, as a horse owner, some horses just never get laminitis and they just never get founder. And especially if they're skinny, they're having trouble keeping on weight, this is when you'll start using grain hay. You'll use it in the winter time. You don't really want to use it in the summertime unless you're working them a lot, you're riding them, you're competing them, getting them looking good. Grass hay, it really loses its value. And that's why a vet tells you to give your horse with laminitis or founder grass hay, because it's really just like eating cardboard almost. And a lot of you people are probably cringing at that because grass hay is so beautiful. Well, it's pretty, but you're not getting a lot of nutrition out of it. And that's why horse owners often have to supplement their horses with some type of grain and or extra type of feed to keep the weight on their horses. Because if you just strictly only feed your horse grass hay, over time they'll start to lose weight. They might look great that first year, mostly because horses tend to be chunkier. They're usually easy keepers. And when you switch to grass hay, it's like, oh my God, my horse looks so good. He's losing his fatness. He looks lean and nice. Then year 2 passes, and it's, wow, my horse is so skinny. What in the world's going on? I just had its teeth floated. I've been worming it. Why is my horse so thin? And that's when the vet will say, well, let's start supplementing it. Let's give him some type of senior feed. Let's give him beet pulp, rice bran. Let's bulk him up a little bit the natural way. And, not all horses need to be strictly on grass hay. That's the plain truth of it. There's different stages of laminitis, and it can eventually turn into founder. So let's just get on to founder. Number 6, founder, and what it really means. Founder is often an interchangeable term used by farriers, used by vets. Laminitis and founder, the gray line is sometimes a little more towards laminitis and sometimes a little more towards founder. Back when I was very first starting, and even when I was a young boy, the term founder was most often used when a horse would sneak into a bag of grain and eat it all in one sitting. That's when the horse owner left the latch open and the grain out, and they got to it and they ate it. And that horse is basically almost on its deathbed the next day and can't move. And because that horse got all that sugar in one setting, it's almost like an overnight process. The hoof is affected almost immediately. In 2 weeks, in 1 month, in 2 months, you see this change happen so rapidly. And you start to see this coffin bone rotate. You start to see the sole protrude down. You see this hoof wall separate. It's a big, bad, ugly flash fire. It's where laminitis goes over time. Founder seems to happen overnight, as we'd like to say. But laminitis over time can turn into founder also if left untreated. A lot of people are told, hey, your horse has laminitis. Change the feed. Pull your horse off the pasture. What do? They leave the horse on the pasture because they don't have the money or the time to build a smaller section, or they just don't care. I'm sorry if I offend anybody, but that's the truth. And what happens is when left untreated, laminitis does turn into founder once the coffin bone starts to rotate. Usually you could still call laminitis with a slight rotation of the coffin bone. And it's laminitis. You got to watch out in springtime when the grass is growing real tall. But there's that gray line. It shifts between vets and shoers. And eventually, once you start seeing founder rings, these are the lines going across the hoof wall horizontally. That's when shoers and vets start to use the word founder more, or when the degree of the coffin bone has rotated to a certain extent, that's when we start to use the word founder, or when the hoof starts to curl up like an elf shoe, that's kind of when we start to use the word founder. But basically it all comes back to feed. And laminitis is something you can kind of get rid of if you catch it quick enough and you keep them on a good diet. You can kind of never get that rotation if you do it quick enough. Whereas founder, the rotations already happened. There's no going backwards in time. Now we got to stop it from going any further. Now you need to be more diligent. You can't mess around. You have to do your horse a favor. You have to get them good food. You can't let them out in the pasture eating all that nice pretty green grass that you want mowed down. Unfortunately, you're going to have to hop on your riding lawnmower and go mow it yourself, or get some goats and cows. That's the honest truth, and I want to be honest with you guys. Number 7, to shoe or to not to shoe? That is the question. And I'm about to answer it for you. So with laminitis and founder, oftentimes the vet will say, throw on some shoes. You might throw on some shoes. They might even want them backwards. I've done that before, and it actually did seem to help. For a sudden onset of laminitis or founder, you rotate the shoe and you do it backwards. You cut that toe off. You do a 4-point trim, and it actually helped. It helped my mother's horse. So, if you're a farrier listening, you might just want to do a backward shoeing on your horse. But the truth is, not all laminitis horses need shoes, especially if it's early onset and it's going its normal rate and the shoer catches it quick enough, or the vet catches it quick enough, or even if you, the horse owner, catch it quick enough, if you know what you're looking for. Oftentimes, you could let things kind of play out a few days at a time, and if the horse can barely walk, that's when you're going to probably want to put some shoes on, or maybe not even yet. Maybe you're just going to do stall rest and throw it in a stall with some shavings. And if it's still sore, then that's maybe when we're going to throw on some shoes for laminitis and founder. And so what type of shoeings do we do? When do we do it? For cracks, for thrush, for abscesses, for laminitis founder, ordinary shoeing. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? When are we doing it? Okay, so let's start at the beginning. As a farrier, I'd advise nobody shoe their horse before the age of 2 unless a vet says this horse needs shoes now because of some medical reason. Okay, so now let's go from there. What are you using your horse for? Is it just trail riding? Is it eventing, jumping, what English riding, barrel racing? There's all kinds of different shoes for different type of sports. But I usually focus on regular, plain, old-fashioned horseshoeing. But there are times when I need to use some more special shoes. And since we're talking about medical issues with the hooves, let's get into those type of shoeings. Alright? We're going to not focus on jumping shoes and all that. Alright? That's another story for another day. Now, the reason why we don't want to shoe a horse before the age of 2 is because you want them to at least have some time to harden up their hooves. They're still soft before then. They're still growing. You want them to expand to a certain degree. You want them to have healthy hoof growth. You want them to be comfortable walking on rocks. If you shoe them too early, it can stunt the hoof growth. It could deform the hoof growth. It could make them ouchy if you take the shoes off for a month, and they might not even be able to want to walk anywhere because they're so reliant on those shoes. It's kind of like your little kid. He's outside running on the gravel up and down the road barefoot, and you try to chase after it because they're being a little hellraiser, and you don't have shoes on either, and you can't go 2 steps, and that little brat is just laughing in your face. Well, that's the same thing. Because this little kid is used to running on the rocks, you want your little horses used to running on the rocks. If you put them on shoes day 1, and then they can't even go 1 foot on without shoes. And the reason why you can't either is because even though as a child you used to be able to run on rocks, you've now always used shoes after a certain age, and that weakens your feet. And that can also happen with horses. If you always leave shoes on and then one day you decide you want to retire your horse and you want to pull the shoes, save some money, and they can't walk. And that's because they've been reliant on those shoes for all those years. And that can be an issue also. So what I advise my clientele base is, when you're riding using the horse, I mean like more than 3 days a week, throw on some shoes, especially if you're riding in Rocky Mountains on the roads, you're going to want shoes. But if you're not using the horse, and especially in winter when it's freezing cold and nobody's wanting to go out and ride except for maybe a parade, leave the shoes off. You don't need shoes in the winter. You're not using your horse. Let them be a horse. Their hoofs should be strong enough. If they're not, for some other reason, whether it's laminitis, founder, navicular, then we're kind of getting into that point where, well, my horse needs shoes all the time his whole life. Like I said earlier, laminitis, you may not need shoes. Uh, a sudden quick onset where they're camping in the back, that's when you're going to want to shoe a laminitis horse because you want them to be able to walk comfortably. But in a few months, you might be able to take those shoes off if everything's healing normal and they could go about their life again if you're not using them a lot. Founder horses. Founder is when you start getting that more severe coffin bone rotation, remember. So, yes, a lot of horse owners and vets, they're going to want shoes on those horses. But really, at the end of the day is, can I afford it? And I'm really not using this horse. Does it really need shoes? Well, that's kind of a gray area there. A vet's going to say, yes, you need shoes. A shoer might say, well, I need money, so yes, you need shoes. Or a shoer might say, I have too much work. Let's just trim your horse. So that's the honest truth. This is the mindsets behind people. And with what I just said, you said, well, the vet is going to want shoes, so I better have shoes. Yeah, that's true, but you have to be true to yourself. If you can't afford it and, it's shoes or feed for the horse, I'd say choose feed for your horse. Because you want your horse to be healthy, but you also have to draw a line somewhere. And most foundered horses, where they would do better with a shoe with a wedge pad or aluminum wedge shoe or a backward shoe or some other special shoe with maybe like a frog pad, those can help your horse. They can. But if your horse really isn't being used, and if it seems kind of happy, just slow poking it out there in the field, and you could barely afford the horse as it is, I'd say spend your money on feed. I'm being honest with you, and we're all humans and we gotta do what we gotta do. Now, most of the time when we shoe horses for hoof issues, the go-to thing is usually a form of pad. It could be a regular flat pad, it could be a wedge pad, it could be a frog pad, it could be an open sole pad. They have all kinds of these pads. It could be rubber, plastic, it could be leather, it could be wood, it could be metal, it could be aluminum. They have all these different type of pads for different type of issues, and they have these different type of horseshoes. We call them egg bars, heart bars. It's kind of like a full circled shoe where it's fully connected instead of a regular horseshoe with the open end. Like I said earlier, you could turn the shoe around and have the backwards of the open end facing the toe. And so when do we use these? Why do we use these? Really, it's between you, the shoer, and the vet. Hopefully your shoer knows enough when to use a certain type of shoe. But I'm going to help you out a little bit. If your horse has thrush, don't put a full closed pad in there. If you're going to use a pad, use an open-ended pad so you could at least still clean it out with your hoof pick. If you got a hoof crack, you're going to probably want a shoe maybe with some clips depending on where the crack is. If you got laminitis and it's really bad, like I said, we could turn the shoe around. If we got founder, I'd probably put a wedge pad to get the degrees kind of more correct and get a little pressure off the tip of the coffin bone. And so we could go from there. Navicular, that's usually a heel issue, so you're going to want some type of heel support. Most often people would use like a frog pad or a thicker pad, like a leather pad. And so at the end of the day, what it all boils down to is you have to communicate with your farrier, with your vet, and even do your own research and figure out what is best for you and your horse. And what might be best for the vet and what might be best for the farrier might not be the best for you, and maybe you want another opinion. And so let's move on to number 8, rasping the hoof and dryness. Now, when I first started horseshoeing, people wanted the hoof always rasped. They wanted it fancy. They wanted it parade ready. They wanted it show ready. They wanted it shiny, clean. They wanted it completely rasped and filed down to make it look nice. And then a few years into shoeing, I started to see a shift. Somewhere, someone said rasping the hoof wall equals dryness of the hoof. Well, if you have a dry hoof, you have a dry hoof. If you have a moist hoof, you have a moist hoof. And as a shoer, I was trying to put the nail on the head. Is this true? Who said this? I never figured out who said it, why all my people are bringing this up to me, getting down my throat saying, no, I don't want the whole hoof cleaned up anymore. I just want the edges cleaned up. So I've had to kind of, take a step back. I had to figure out what's going on. One of the ways I did this by stepping back, I would then start to ask people, do you want your horse hoof show quality? That means completely filing the outside of the hoof, making it look pretty. Or do you not really care and you just want me to get the edges and the flare down and the cracks out? And what I was finding was a lot of my clientele, they weren't picky. They just wanted me to do my job to the best of my ability. But it did help by asking sometimes what I was doing, what the customer wanted, because there you do come across people that are very opinionated and they're paying you and they have the right to be opinionated and they have the right to say yes, I want it cleaned up, or no, I do not want it cleaned up because it dries the hoof out. And then I went backwards in time. There's always this old myth, and it's been around forever. White hoofs are weaker than black hoofs. White hoofs are drier than black hoofs. And at first, when I started horseshoeing, I really didn't notice a difference. I was like, white and black hoofs, they're all the same. And then kind of halfway through, over the years, about 5 years into shoeing, yeah, it took 5 years, and I'm not going to lie to you, I finally kind of looked back and I saw that, yeah, you know what? White hoofs kind of are weaker, and I don't know why. What is going on here? And so I started digging into the web journals, vets, shoers. I was trying to see what is going on here. Why are some hoofs drier? And it always came back to genetics. It came back to the environment where you live. If your horse is from Michigan and then you buy it and you bring it to California, well, they're used to that wet environment, and you bring it over here and it's like a culture shock for their hoofs, believe it or not. And they're just dry all the time, and especially if they're white hoofs, then they're even more dry. And then if you rasp a few layers off the hoof, yes, you do kind of rasp a small protective coat off the hoof. So I guess whoever started this rasping the hoof wall makes it drier or weaker, they're slightly correct. And, so I have to give them that. But how much correct are they? How much drier does rasping the hoof wall actually make them? The answer is not really that much, because at the end of the day, the horse is going to look shiny for a few days, and then they're going to get that protective coat back from the mud, from the dust, the sweat, the oils, the natural oils, or people putting the little coating over the hoof wall with the hoof conditioners. And so, yes, it does dry out the hoof a little bit for a couple days, but then it's null and void. And there's a larger issue of why people have dry horse hooves, and that's because of where they're at. What type of terrain are they on? Do the people let their water troughs overflow so their hoofs can get wet once in a while? And, California, where I'm from, the summers are extremely dry. We don't have humid summers, we have dry summers. And that's going to dry out anything, and including horse hooves. And so how I got around to this issue of dryness is I focus on the bottom of the hoof. I want to get all these cracks out. I want to get these flares out. And then once I got this half Mustang roll done, I got the hoof trimmed. I got it nice, I got it good. And then you come to that last part. Do you want the hoof walls cleaned or not? At the end of the day, it's up to the client. If they're going to a show, they're going to usually want it cleaned. Even if they're that one person at the very beginning that said, oh, it dries out the hoof, I don't want it. And, you guys got to own it because you know it's true. And I like telling the truth. So sorry if I offend you. Now, treating hoof dryness. I always tell people to let the water trough overflow. Now, if you have automatic waters, that's a little harder to do, but you can still drag a hose over and make a little water hole. Um, this helps, when they come in to get a drink, they're stepping in a little muddy pool in the summertime, and it gets some fluids into those hoofs. And that's part of the battle is just the outside the nature of it. But it's also what the horse is eating. Are they getting enough nutrition in their stomach? Is their stomach producing the correct vitamins and all this? There's lots of factors that go into dry hoofs, and it may be different for every horse. But one of the common ways to kind of get around this, if you got dry hoofs, you could just go buy some hoof conditioner and you paint it on. A lot of people do that. Kind of looks like nail polish, so a lot of kids like that. And the other thing you could do actually is you could go to Costco or Walmart or Kmart, someplace where you could get a good deal for a bulk thing of margarine. Margarine butter, the fake stuff. Usually you could get that really cheap, and what you do is you get a paper towel and you dip it in your margarine and you start smothering it on your horse hoofs. You could put it on the tops, on the bottoms, on the frogs, and the hoof starts to suck in those oils. Hoofs are a lot like wood. I've used wood glue and wood putty because it works with hoofs. And like wood, hoofs soak in the wetness. It soaks in oils, it soaks in water, just like wood does. If you leave it out in the rain, it's going to kind of suck in all the moisture. Number 9, how long do I go between trims and shoeings? Now this question differs for the type of horse, what you're doing with the horse, the illness with the horse hoofs. And so let's just start at the beginning. Most people get their horses shoed and trimmed between 4 to 12 weeks. And the most common number between the 4 to 12 weeks is 8 weeks. Every 2 months, most people get their horses trimmed and shoed. And the reason for this is because 4, 5, 6 weeks might seem a little too soon for most horses, and 9, 10, 11, 12 weeks might seem a little too long for most horses. So 8 weeks seems to be the magic number. Now, why would someone get their horse done every 4 weeks? These are people that are always showing their horses. They want their horses shiny. They don't care about dry hoofs. They just want them shiny. They want new shoes. They want them looking good. They want a good balance underneath their horse. They want it done. But this can lead to issues with hoof wall issues in regards to nail holes. And so you need a shoer that knows how to plug up nail holes. And not all the time the nail holes stay plugged up. I apprenticed under a shoer. He used to use plumber putty. And that seemed to work pretty good. And he liked doing horses every 4 weeks. And he would charge a lot of money because show people they're willing to spend a lot of money. Now the people that go every 12 weeks, These are people that usually live in mountainous areas with lots of rocks. Their horses are chipping away their hooves, kind of grinding down the hoofs, and or they can afford their horses, but they still want to save a little money and they know their horse can go a little longer than normal. And so that's why they wait till 12 weeks instead of doing it at 8 weeks. Other reasons why someone might do 4 or 5 weeks is because they have a horse that's battling laminitis and founder. And so horses with laminitis and founder, they just start to grow real long. They get very toey. You got to keep it under control. So those are the people that are also wanting it done every 4 to 5 weeks. Now, the people wanting it done every 6 to 7 weeks, they feel like between 6 and 8 weeks, for some reason, there's this spurt of growth. For some reason, hoofs just tend to grow real long in those 2 weeks. And so people want to always keep them at an average length. And so they'll have shoers come out every 6 to 7 weeks and just keep it looking normal. The people that go every 10 weeks are like the people that go 12 weeks. They feel like their horses for some reason could go a little longer, or they're just trying to save a little. Now, on the very rare occasion, some horses could go usually about 6 months without needing a trim. These are horses that just don't grow, or they're in that very rocky terrain like I mentioned earlier. But this can also be an issue. If they're not growing, you don't really want to take the chance of them also getting a very bad chip. Because if they're already having an issue growing, and now if they get a big, bad, ugly crack, it'll be hard to grow that hoof back where that crack has taken a chunk out of the hoof. And some people even go once a year. Now, this is a little much. I'm not accusing you guys of anything, but you guys really should at least have your horses done twice a year. Coming from a professional, if you guys trust me and believe me, I'd say at least try to get your horses done twice a year. Some people go every other year. They'll do it once every 2 years. And quite frankly, I don't believe in that. And I won't go any further into my feelings about that. And now that moment you've all been waiting for. Number 10. I know this has been a long journey with me, but hang in there. Alternative shoes is my number 10. Now, there's been this blue and orange rubber shoe with Velcro that's been sweeping across Facebook and the social media all over YouTube, even made national news. I won't name the name of the maker of the shoe because I don't want to give them business and I don't want to take away their business. Now, let's start at the beginning. Alternative shoes. As a farrier, I'm all for alternative shoes because the old-fashioned shoeing, it's very costly for me, not only financially but also physically. I'm under a horse a lot longer. The materials used for shoeing is expensive, and at the end of the day, when I compare trims versus shoeings, I'm making a lot more money doing horse trims. And so alternative shoes, something easy that we could slip on real quick, that would benefit me. But alternative horseshoes have not yet been perfected to the same level as old-fashioned horseshoes. And nothing's really perfect, but at least the old-fashioned horseshoe can last 2 months. These new alternative shoes, most of the cases can't even last 1 week. Now, why is this happening? Because old-fashioned horseshoes actually put a nail through the hoof wall. They are by no means injuring a horse hoof. The horse should not even feel it if done correctly. Once the nail is through the hoof and out the other side, the shoer then clinches it down for extra sturdiness. Well, these alternative shoes, they don't go into the hoof. That's their whole gimmick. That's how they sell these shoes. We're not putting these horrible nails through your horse hoofs by us. Well, So they need a way to stay fastened to a hoof, and that's through the hoof wall. Most of the cases you use an adhesive, a glue, a very sturdy glue that hardens almost automatically, instantly. And this glue, for some reason, it does its job for a day or two, but after about a week, it's done. It loses its connection to the hoof wall and it falls off. The other alternatives are hybrid shoes where they use a mixture of like rubber boot bottoms, so it looks like a mountain boot on the bottom instead of a horseshoe, but they still put nails through the hoof wall, and then on top of that they added an adhesive layer, a glue onto the hoof wall. And for whatever reason, these do almost make it 5, 6 weeks. That's about their lifespan. So those are kind of a good alternative, but they're very expensive. And for some reason, they still have a high chance of falling off, even 1 week in, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But if done correctly, they can last, 5, 6 weeks. So I'm giving them a little credit. But then you got these other shoes that are made purely out of adhesive. So they're not even a shoe. You just get a thing adhesive and you make your own shoe. And that doesn't last not even a day. Then you got these new shoes like the one flooding social media, the news, Facebook, YouTube. And this looks like the hallelujah, the savior to all alternative shoes. This company's getting a lot of credit. To be quite honest with you, I have not tested this brand of shoes yet. I'm sure I will. I'm sure someone's going to buy it, and I'm sure they're going to have me put them on. But there's a couple glaring issues with me that right away, right when I saw it, I was like, oh no, these aren't going to last very long like the other shoes. Even though in the video they got them running through the rocky water, they got them running up hills, they got them doing jumps, it looks like a perfect shoe on video. Well, they're meant to sell. They want your $170, but per pair. But anything using Velcro, it's not going to last very long. I'm very sorry, but it's not. Now you can make it last longer by doing duct tape around the hoof. After you've velcroed everything down, you could use duct tape. So I'm actually giving them tips. People that buy these type of shoes can actually use them like that. But also the type of clips that they use, they don't, even though there's like 6 clips, 5 clips per side of the hoof, that adds an extra stableness. So that's like instead of using nails, right? But horses are so heavy when they're doing their turns, when they're doing their jumps. I feel like these clips aren't going to be strong enough to hold up because there's nothing going into the hoof. And as much as I want an alternative shoe to succeed and be better than an old-fashioned shoe, I don't yet think this is the one. I hope maybe they prove me wrong. I hope I get to try it one day and it works perfectly. I really do. So, what alternative shoe should you use? I say use a boot. I like the Cavallo boots personally. They're not paying me to give them honor. I make no money off this, but these are the boots that I found that actually stay on the best. But before you put them on, because they have a nasty side effect, and I've seen it firsthand, you always want to wrap up the hoof and the coronary band and the buttress of the hoof with vet wrap or some type of wrap before you put the hoof into the boot, because these boots, they go up higher than almost all other boots, and if you go on a long ride, it's gonna chafe the hoof. It's going to chafe the buttress, it's going to chafe the coronary band, and that can cause abscessing. So please wrap them up if you buy these boots. And other than that, also they're Velcro. So I was just giving another shoe company issue about Velcro a hard time.
when you put these boots on, get duct tape and do 2 layers around these Velcro straps. That'll sturdy up the shoe, and you probably won't ever lose a shoe on a ride. Putting a Before I conclude this very long video, I'd like to take a step back and go over 2 topics that I forgot to go over earlier. Number one is involving hoof cracks. I know I'd get a lot of comments down below asking or talking about notch above a hoof crack. A lot of farriers tend to take the rasp and put a notch above a crack to kind of so and so stop it. Other farriers that are hot shoers, they'll take a hot iron, a crescent moon shape, and they'll just burn in a stopper or blocker for the crack. This is all visual. It is for the customer to see that your shoer is trying to stop the crack, when in fact it really doesn't. If anything, it just weakens the wall a little more. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I knew I would get comments down below this video, and I just want to go over that really quick. It is a superficial thing. It's to make the client feel better. In reality, the best way to get rid of cracks is to completely rasp the entire crack out of the hoof. Sometimes that will leave the hoof looking deformed looking for a month or two until it grows back correctly. Another method is shoeing, like I mentioned earlier. And number two, the second thing I forgot to mention, and I'll leave a picture up here with the directions, is when you have a horse with laminitis or founder, something's going on with their gut, correct? That's why they're getting too much sugar and all that. Well, an old-fashioned remedy, actually was a college study done. I got this recipe from a Dr. Lobb. He's a vet at McCalmy River near where I live. And he actually told us to do 2 cups of corn oil and 1 tablespoon of cooking yeast. And this recipe kind of acts as a probiotic. What it does is it cleans out the horse's gut, and then it allows the gut to produce the correct vitamins for the hoofs. And he said to do this every day for about 2 months, and then you could start weaning it down from every day to every other day, and for a couple weeks, and then after that maybe once every 4 or 5 days. And you just keep kind of winging it off until your horse's hoofs look pretty good. And so we did this for about 2.5 months with one of our horses, and it actually did help. But you have to stay on top of it, you have to stay diligent, and that's not always the easiest thing to do to make a soupy mixture for your horse. And by soupy mixture, I mean you have to mix in this 2 cups of corn oil and tablespoon of cooking yeast with something. You could use like senior feed that's low in sugar, since we're using that for a laminitis or foundered horse. But the best thing that we found was actually maybe like a coffee can of beet pulp unsweetened with a half a coffee can of rice bran. And we would put that all in a dish, and we'd mix it up with water, and then we'd add the 2 cups of corn oil and the tablespoon of cooking yeast. And so it takes a little time to prepare this soupy texture meal for your horse, but in the long run, it does help horses with laminitis and founder issues. It gets the vitamins after a while going to the hoofs, and so I wish you guys luck. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you all for sticking around and listening to me talk about hoof care. I hope this helps aid you in your lifelong adventure towards knowing more about your horses. And even if you don't own any horses, maybe you've learned something new today. I'm not sure. If you have any comments or concerns, or if you just want to argue with me, feel free to leave comments below in the Facebook or YouTube channel. Please like and share either on Facebook or YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube. I'm going to do more videos in the future. They might not all be on horses. I'm into sciences and culture and art, so I might do some other type of things. All the next videos are going to be a lot shorter, I promise you. But this is something I know a lot about and I'm passionate about because this is what has put me through college. And so I want to give it credit where it's due. And also, if you guys have any issues, feel free to ask me. If you're having hoof issues and you need help and you don't know what's going on and you need a little guidance, I can help you. I'm not going to charge you for that. All I ask is that people share this video, um, and even if it gets a bad rap or a good rap, at least it's being shared and it might help someone. And you know, I wish you all the best of luck. And my internet gaming name is Assassin Park, so that's what you're going to see on my YouTube. And I'm going to try and shift that into something positive, and I'd like to kill the void for you. Everybody has a void in their minds and in their life, and I want to fill it with helpful facts and hints. So thank you and have a good day.